So previously I made a video about how variety in the media is good, and I want to have a follow-up to that talking about video games specifically. Video games have been a pretty hot button issue for a while now, but I think a lot of the controversy could be avoided if they just focused more on variety when it comes to things like genre, character design, and target audience, because in the end if you try to make something that appeals to everyone, it probably won't appeal to anyone. They seem to be operating on the idea of if we cast as wide a net as possible, we'll get a better return on investment, and being profit-driven, I can see why they would have that thought process. However, I think in practice this hasn't been working out for them, and even hurting their bottom line, as well as their reputation in some cases. For example, Concord, a live service game that didn't even last 2 weeks before it was shut down, and Sony made a lot of obvious missteps that led to the game's inevitable failure. First of all, the game had an upfront cost of $40, which just isn't competitive in the gaming market. First-person hero shooters are typically free to play, so having an upfront cost on top of microtransactions is not something most players will compromise on. On top of that, the game itself was very underwhelming, both in what it had to offer gameplay-wise and in the character designs, to the point where it just couldn't compete with other games on the market. Overwatch, Apex Legends, and now with Marvel Rivals, Concord got buried pretty easily, and hopefully Sony will be able to use this as a learning experience. Another thing that happens when it comes to gaming is that they'll rely on the same tropes. For example, Fortnite recently released some crow-themed skins. The male skin actually looks like a bird, while the female skin is just a woman wearing some feathers on her clothes, leading to the quote tweets commenting on this pattern. Gaming has typically been seen as a masculine hobby. Since the target audience is usually males, they'll have the male characters look cool and visually interesting, with a lot more thought put into their designs, while the female characters will often just look like attractive women, with maybe a few design choices meant to imply what kind of monster she's supposed to be, as we can see here with this Fortnite example. And admittedly, it would be nice to see more variety when it comes to this kind of character design. One game that I think gets it right is actually Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is a gacha game where you collect champions. They have hundreds of characters that are separated into different factions, and some of those factions are made up of monster people, like the Skinwalkers, which are human-animal hybrids, mostly mammals, but a few birds too, like for example Gwendolyn the Silent, an owl woman who actually looks like an owl. And they have a lot of variety between these characters, not only in how they look, but also how they dress. Like Gwen is pretty modest, but then there are characters like Cleopteryx, who is a hawk woman, and while her outfit is more to be expected when it comes to these kinds of games, she's still very visually interesting, and actually on theme for this kind of faction. These are bird women who actually look like bird women, and this level of design is not just for the Skinwalker faction, like for example the Lizardman faction, which involves mostly reptiles, and one of the characters in their roster is Venomage, a snake woman, a character who is both overtly feminine and still monstrous, and I do wish that other video games would take risks with their character design like these. Raid does have plenty of conventionally attractive characters, both male and female, but it is still cool to get this kind of variety in the roster, and I think it's something that Fortnite could experiment with too, at least when it comes to these specific skins. And the same is true for other games. Characters can have a variety of skins, like Marvel Rivals just announced new skins for Valentine's Day, involving Reed Richards and Sue Storm, putting the two of them in wedding attire, and it's honestly very wholesome and cute. But this also comes after their supervillain skins were released, Malice and the Maker respectively. There was some controversy revolving around the Malice skin, with some people arguing that it went too far, although personally I think it's a big improvement over what we had in the comics. They were also calling for equal opportunity sexy, which sure, why not bring in the Marvel Swimsuit Edition outfits? That would be a fun summer event. Ultimately, these are just options that you can choose to engage with or not, and I think having more options in general is a good thing, not just in skins and character designs, but also genres and target demographics, whether it's age or even gender. We are starting to see more games that are specifically targeted to girls, which I think is a better option than taking an existing franchise and trying to change its target demographic, which is something we have seen from AAA gaming recently, where they say they want to connect with a modern audience, only to pretty much fail to connect with anyone, because there are too many elements missing to really connect to any demographic, and it's probably best to create a new property that can just find its own audience. Like Infinity Nikki, for example, which is basically Mario Odyssey but with dresses instead of hats. It takes familiar game mechanics like platforming, exploration, and adventuring, but coats it in an unapologetically feminine aesthetic, and it's a huge success. It's really accessible, and it's nice to have something that's actually built from the ground up for girls, instead of just taking a boy property and trying to force it. But having a lot of options and variety and choice is great for consumers. Have first-person shooters, RPGs, cozy games, or adventure games. It's pretty obvious that video games have a large enough market base that all of these can exist at once. And I think the success of games like Infinity Nikki prove that gaming companies don't have to worry about only targeting one demographic. Another game that proves that point is Love in Deepspace, a gacha game that again targets women. It's also made by the same company that made Infinity Nikki, and like a lot of other gacha games, there's a heavy use of fan service in its marketing. It's kinda like Final Fantasy, but you can date the boys. The main plot doesn't actually focus on the romance. It's more about the lore and the gameplay, which is pretty combat focused, with the romantic moments being relegated to the gacha system, where you collect cards that you can use in combat, but they also unlock dates with the love interests. Most of these dates are pretty wholesome and romantic, and some of them not so much. Like their latest banner for Valentine's Day, which is basically just the Malice storyline. The guys get corrupted by an outside force, are put in a ridiculous but sexy outfit for fan service, and then try to attack and kill their love interest. Quick, tell them all their insecurities are justified and then smack them. It's the only way to snap them back to reality. Reed Richards approved. So yeah, I had the same complaints I did for the Malice storyline. At least in this game it's contained to a what if AU, and not actually part of the main storyline like what we get with comics, where you're reading a fun superhero comic and then all of a sudden Avengers number 200 happens, where Miss Marvel is forced to give birth to and marry the man who SA'd her, and this is just canon now. This is something that happened, even though it's extremely weird and uncomfortable, and totally not appropriate for the target demographic for comics, as evident by the giant Toys R Us sweepstakes on the cover. At least Love in Deepspace is A, for adults, and B, knows their audience. Things could be worse. Admittedly, I'm not surprised that Love in Deepspace is as popular as it is. There are quite a few gacha games that are basically waifu collectors, like Snowbreak or Azure Lane, but not a lot in the opposite direction, meaning that lads doesn't have much in the way of competition. So a game specifically targeted to women with this level of quality in both the writing and the visuals, especially the visuals, it was bound to be a success. There was a lot of drama on Twitter surrounding this game, but to be honest, it doesn't actually do anything we haven't seen before. Yes, including that feature. This is not the first game to do that. I think it's just that this game got so popular it hit the mainstream, so it got exposed to people who aren't that familiar with this genre. Like, I can understand people taking issue with the spicier content, but there were some pretty wild takes floating around Twitter. Like this one reading, "A message to every woman. A gooner game isn't just an over-sexualized game." Yes, it is. That's really the only requirement. But moving on. It's also games that attempt to farm parasocials, to feel like the video game character cares and understands you more than those in real life. I mean, he basically just described a romance option. By that logic, Stardew Valley is a gooner game. I mean, does gooner even mean anything at that point? Obviously, it's about the over-sexualized nature. There's a huge difference between Stardew Valley and Honey Pop. There are games that have romance options like Cyberpunk 2077, Mass Effect franchise, or Baldur's Gate 3, where it's an option but it's not a requirement to play the game. But then there's the specific genre of dating sims, where the point is to romance and make a connection with a fictional character. Some of these games are very wholesome, but some of them are 18+ and more illicit, like the aforementioned Honey Pop. The dating sim genre isn't going to appeal to everyone, and that's okay, people have different tastes. But to criticize a dating sim for being a dating sim just seems pretty counterintuitive. But that's also why variety is so great. We can have different games that appeal to different tastes. I mean, there's obviously a market for this, otherwise it wouldn't be selling so well, with lads pretty consistently landing at the top or near the top of the monthly revenue for gacha games. As for the second half of that statement, I feel like it plays into old stereotypes about video games. You know, people not being able to tell the difference between fiction and reality. If you play Grand Theft Auto, you'll want to attack people in real life. Stuff like that. I think it's okay not to like this more adult content, or this kind of gameplay, whether it's dating sims or M-rated games, but games are supposed to be a fantasy, and it's okay if games don't specifically appeal to you, but they don't have to demonize the players and the entire genre. I think people can tell what they're getting into. The gaming industry is big enough to where there should be room for everyone. Instead, we often see gamers end up being pitted against each other, whether it's gamers blaming each other for AAA game studios making games that appeal to no one, or those game studios videos blaming audiences for not showing up, or gamers judging each other for the games they play, whether it's too casual, or too violent, or too sexy. Maybe if we just let gamers game, it'll show companies that variety is a good thing. But that's just my opinion. What do you guys think about variety in gaming? Let me know in the comments below, I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching everyone, I really appreciate it. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to the members: Tyrant Carnivore, Shiny Orc Boy, Depth Charge Media, Samaru163, Gabby Hime, Verdant Range, JVR, Equestron, Norman Sweetcream, Way Beyond Coincidence, Hunter Rose, 80s Nostalgia Guy, Felix Bam, Lucas Geist, J Draws, Meowsers, Sky, Philip, Isaac Martinez, Garcia XV Legend, Tobias Weller, Bandito Bane, Mac B909, Dakari the Professor, Todd McCaffrey, Omni Fair, General Bolivar, Cavalcoj, Strider Exile, Phil C, Killer Bomb, Username Not Found Yet, Owen Wildish, Slawa Saporiguez, Entwined Boot 301, Griffin of Might, Frankie Camarillo, Datadyne Executive, Caleb Nelson, and Crimson Phantom. Thank you for the support. And if you want to become a member, you can hit the join button next to the subscribe button. We also have Buy Me Coffee if you want to support us that way. And if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And that part's free. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.